mistletoe, there was a god called Baldur, and he feared that the animals and the plants were out to kill him. So his wife and his mother went to all the animals and the plants and gathered them all together, and they made a pact not to kill their husband and son. They forgot the mistletoe. On All Souls' Day, an arrow shot through the air, made out of mistletoe, and struck the god Baldur dead. So they hung the mistletoe around their door frames to remind them of that great event. It's one story. The other story dates back to the Druids and the Celtic people. They believed on All Souls' winter's night that the mistletoe had this magical power for healing. And so they would use it in all their rituals. Well, the Christians came along and said, if you're a Christian, you are not to hang mistletoe or to kiss under the mistletoe because of its pagan origins. And the third one is that in the 16th century in England, they would hang the mistletoe over the bedroom doorway because they believed it had fertility powers. And that night, the woman would become impregnated and it would bring forth a son to the household. So be careful when you kiss under the mistletoe. So that's something, a little bit of history for Christmas time. I don't know what they did, but that's the old ancient stories, okay? Anyway, let's go back to our class. Last week, remember the fish story. I talked about the fish and how the guy had a fish and he would put the bones aside and he would eat the fish. Well, basically, that's what we have to do with the book of Revelation. There will be some hard passages to understand. Put them aside. Feast on the things that we can understand. That's one of the main reasons why people get bogged down in it. We said that it's the style of his writing. It's not didactic, it's not pastoral, it's not historic, meaning it's not looking back historically, but it is prophetic, which means it is looking forward to the things that will shortly come to pass from what John wrote. And so why did he use this kind of writing? I ended up last week by saying that Jesus used parables, and that parables were used to tell the truth about something that only the insiders would know the truth and the meaning. The outsiders didn't know it. And that's why the scribes and Pharisees had a hard time with Jesus' teaching, because he taught in parables to confuse the wise and the powerful, in order that his message would get out to those that needed to hear it. If John wrote the book of Revelation, why would he use this style of writing? Why would he use the style of writing that he used? Well, if John was to write a straightforward message to the churches in Asia, and it was a straightforward message saying, this is what's going to happen, and the Roman Empire is going to be defeated, the emperor is going to be defeated, do you think that those Christians would be worshipping in Asia Minor? So, he used this style of writing well, it's really like the style of writing is used to take away the message from who he's directing it towards and directing it towards the insiders, not the outsiders, so that the insiders would understand what is about to take place. And it's the same sort of writing as what took place in the Old Testament. We alluded that there are over 400, 500 references in the Old Testament mainly that are found in the book of Revelation. And there is nothing in the book of Revelation that is outside of the Bible itself. And so when we're studying this wonderful letter, or book, whichever you like to use, when you're studying it, everything is found within the Word of God. We said that it was very important that the early church people knew the Old Testament. And sometimes I feel we, myself included, we don't study enough to show ourselves approved, correctly handling the Word of God. Because these people did. Their lifestyle, the way they lived, the way they meditated upon the Word, the way the Word was mainly used in their worship service, compared to how little it's used in our worship service. I'm not talking about the little few verses we read just before the preacher gets up, and then think that we have publicly read the Word of God. When we study that a little bit more in detail later on, you'll see what I'm talking about. Okay? I'm not trying to put Jared out of a job, but preaching was not for the saved. It's not. The word preaching means to proclaim. What is a preacher to proclaim? The good news. The gospel message.
What did they go off over?
Say that again?
What did the saints go all over the land teaching?
Well, they went out preaching. They went out preaching. So, we have to realize here that if John wrote a straightforward message that anyone could easily understand, I always tell people, just give me straightforward English and I'll understand you. Okay? Don't speak in other stuff, or don't speak in the ghetto talk, because I won't understand what you're talking about. Straightforward English. So if John spoke straightforward Greek, or Italian for the Romans, or Latin, as you would say, they would understand what was going to take place. And then that would put the church and him and everyone else in jeopardy and forfeiting of their lives. So John uses this code, this ancient code of writing, which the saints would understand, which the Jews would understand, but the outsiders wouldn't. And so it's very easy to understand that you don't want to upset the enemy if it's directed about them. Because it would be regarded as treason. Would it not? If someone went out and said they were going to assassinate so-and-so, you can't say because I don't want to say that I said something I don't mean, but if somebody was going to say they were going to assassinate a certain person, what would happen to that person in this country? Don't you think the leaders and everyone else would be right after him? You're darn right they would. And so it would be the same. If you're saying in those days that I'm going to assassinate the Caesar, the Emperor of Rome, he's going to be assassinated, he's going to die. That's treasonous talk, isn't it? It's sedition in its truest form. And so that's why we have to understand that they wanted to hide the message away from the Roman authorities. and to Caesar the emperor himself. There is something else you also have to understand why John used this style of writing, is that emperor worship had been well established in John's time. It was demanded throughout the Roman Empire by the emperor sitting on the throne at this time. And you have to understand also that John is warning the saints of this emperor worship business. I don't know if you understand what I'm trying to say there, but let me try and put it this way. Rome itself, Rome's state, the state of Rome, was deified by the Senate. The Romans living in Rome worshipped Rome. Worshipped Rome, not only the city, but Rome as a state. They had a god, Roma. So Roma was the god of the Roman people, the city. And in order to gain the allegiance of the citizens, the loyalty of the citizens, the Senate decided to turn Rome into a god state. Did you know, in fact, Smyrna, one of the letters we're going to study later on, do you know what they erected in 195 BC in their city? They erected a statue of Roma, and it stood over 10 foot tall. Wow. This was before John writing the book of Revelation. So they turned Roma and they personified Roma. And they personified the state and the city. So, in order to do this, they wanted to control the people. So in personification, it really means it's a figure of speech which human characteristics are attributed to an abstract quality, an animal, or an inanimate object. So think about that. When you think about countries that are trying to make people worship the state rather than the Creator himself, you think that country's going to last long? But it's going to be a hard time for those Christians, isn't it?
Yeah, for the one that refused.
For the one who refuses. And doesn't this draw you close to home in what's going on in this country? Where the state is becoming all powerful and your rights are being taken away? Studying this book of Revelation really brings it to life and what's going on in the world today to me. And I sometimes think we are a sleeping giant. We're scared to speak up. We're scared to proclaim the true God. In the workplace, marketplace, in the home, in the courtyard, in the playground. Very rarely do we have conversations and try to bring people back to the one true God. The state became such a supreme God state that the citizens would have to pledge allegiance to its cause. And so, as I said before, this was a way to secure the allegiance of the citizens by making the state divine, and thus anyone who refused that Rome itself was divine, punishment would be given. Did you know that Augustus Caesar came to the throne in 27 BC? He reigned until 14 AD. He was the Caesar, the king of Rome, sitting as the emperor at the time of the King of Kings' birth. Now, this Augustus Caesar, he started to think himself as being the embodiment of the state. You know how dangerous that is when a leader starts thinking that he's the embodiment, or she is the embodiment of the state? You know how dangerous that is? Why do you think that in America they had a three-way check balance? What was the purpose of that? So that no one power could rule the country, the state. Checks and balances. But this Augustus Caesar, he decided to look upon him as representing the whole state of Rome, the embodiment of Rome. In fact, you know, one of his very first requirements to the Senate of Rome was to do what? Does anyone know? It was to deify his grandfather, Julius Caesar. You have to understand that he demanded the Senate to pay divine honor and homage to Julius Caesar. And the purpose behind that is, if he was to deify Julius Caesar, what would happen and follow next? What was that? Himself. In other words, he was after the title of deity. I am God in the flesh. I am the personification of all that Rome is. And it's not about the state now. It's all about me. Having said that, Caesar Augustus gave permission. Listen now. It's very careful to listen to this part. He gave permission to the provinces of Asia and Bithynia to erect temples to his grandfather, Julius Caesar. And this is where emperor worship had its roots. Where were the seven churches? And where did emperor worship start? Asia Minor and Bithynia. So the seven churches are in the hotbed of emperor worship, where it all began. That's why John uses these codes. Because they're sitting in the hotbed. Julius Caesar wasn't the first Caesar of Rome. Do you know that? He was a dictator. Augustus Caesar is the first of the 12 Caesars. Julius Caesar was such a brutal dictator when you read history. He was ruthless. After all, he was a great general. Senate finally caved in to Augustus Caesar, and they deified Julius Caesar. And remember we just said that it was the beginning of Augustus trying to be deified himself while alive and living. Let's point out a little bit about these provinces, okay? It was these provinces who were very, and I do mean very, enthusiastic of having emperor worship. More than anyone else. It was requested, as I said, by Augustus Caesar to erect temples to his grandfather. And he willingly gave them permission. When they came begging, go ahead. Because it was paving the way to what he ultimately wanted. And you know, here's the real kicker though, because the Senate agreed to make Julius Caesar divine, or saying that really what they did was they said they were saying he was divine. It's not actually saying yes, he was, but saying he was divine. And nobody in the Senate really paid any attention to this divineship. They paid no attention to it. What they were really trying to do is appease Augustus. Isn't it funny when people try to just appease leaders? So that we'll appease you a little bit here, so you get your way, but they don't realize what the intent of the whole thing is, of why somebody wants something. A lot of the times, there is a reason why people act the way they act, or ask for what they ask for, because there's a hidden meaning in the background. And then all of a sudden, after you allow them to have what they want, boom! Hook, line, and sinker. Gotcha. You did give me that permission to do as I wanted. Think about that when we look at the issues of that time. Does anyone know who followed Augustus Caesar? It's on the board. Tiberius. Did you know, this is the funny thing, Augustus wanted divinity. He wanted to be God. Tiberius, he actually forbade emperor worship. That's right. He forbade emperor worship. He said, that's not right. The emperor is not God. He's not divine, Tiberius said. And then along came Caligula. Oh, he went the other way. It is said that Caligula was an insane devil. Did you get that? Caligula was an insane devil. Do you know what they said about Domitian? They said that Domitian was a sane devil, the opposite. Caligula then was an insane devil. He was mad. He was known to have outbursts of anger. He was also an epileptic. And also was Julius Caesar an epileptic. Did you know that? But Caligula, he tried to enforce emperor worship, particularly upon two groups. Anyone know who those two groups are? Well, who would deny emperor worship? What two groups would deny emperor worship?
Christians and Jews.
Christians and the Jews. the Hebrews and the Jews. Did you know that Caligula had in his plans to erect a monument of himself? Do you know where? In Jerusalem, in the Holy of Holies. His plan didn't carry out, because you know why? Dead. But he had plans to do so. That's amazing to me when I look back at history. Because there were other people that did things to the temple of the Jews. Do you remember the pigs? Do you remember the God erected up, that was torn back down, erected up and torn back down to destroy it? Yeah? I strongly recommend, to understand what's going on, there is an author called Suetonius. There's only one work of his that has survived all of history. It is 12 Caesars. In fact, the BBC, when I was a teenager, you can buy it now, they had a series called I, Claudius. And it showed a thing about all these emperors and the story of it, leading up to when Claudius himself took the throne. There is another series that came out recently, and it was talking about, it's titled Rome, and it starts with Julius Caesar, and it goes all the way through, which is very interesting to see. Some things I'll quickly fast forward, but just to understand what's going on. But I recommend that you get that book, the book on Suetonius, and read it. It was a little racy in its style for its day. In fact, it really paved the way. It was kind of like, you would say, a tabloid newsletter, style of writing. So it was well advanced. And, but it was very graphic in places. I had to read it in school in order to study this class. It was a requirement that we read that book. So, Claudius, when he became emperor, he reversed this whole business of emperor worship again. And he discouraged it to the max. Now, Claudius was a genius. His IQ was way above anybody else of his time. And he understood the importance of the emperor not being personified or deified. He was a down-to-earth emperor. If there was ever an emperor in Rome, he was a good guy. He had seen all the mess of everybody else, and he wanted to change the way that Rome operated. But he was very old when he became Caesar. I love the title of the movie. I remember watching this movie a long time. Along Came a Spider. I love that title for a movie. Well, along came Nero. Did you know that Nero never, ever took divinity seriously? He didn't. Nero's persecution of the Christians wasn't religious, like the other emperors. Nero's persecution was political. And you all know why, don't you? Why did Nero go after the Christians? Well, Nero thought he was the greatest architect in the whole world. And he decided he was going to build a new part of the city. He wanted to destroy the slums and build a new part to the city. But Nero burned down the wrong part of the city. He burned down the good part. And so then he says, I've got to have an scapegoat here to save my neck. Here's those Christians. They're the escape. They're the ones that started the fire. So Nero's persecution of the Christians was local. I want you to remember this. We'll talk about that a little later. His persecution of Christians was local to Rome itself, as a political scapegoat. And then he went on to build Rome, the new Rome. After Nero's death, you get 3 emperors in a row. Okay? 3 emperors in a row. That's in the space of 18 months. It is during this 18-month period you see in Rome that there is a civil turmoil. There is great disturbance within the state, there is confusion within the state, and there is a great uncertainty within that 18-month period. In fact, nobody ever bothered with emperor worship in this 18-month period. Nobody. It fell into the background, into the wasteland. But then along came Domitian. Domitian reigned from the year 81 AD. In fact, he was made emperor on the 14th of September 81 AD, and he died on the 18th of September 96 AD. And that's an important date, 96 AD, to the letter of this book, to the letter of Revelation. So Domitian not only reverted back to emperor worship, he did it with great enthusiasm. And he enforced emperor worship, and it had never, ever been enforced in Roman history at that time. He made dramatic changes. Did you know that he demanded worship of himself? Demand worship of yourself? Do you think that would go over good to the saints? Or to the Jew? He actually issued orders and proclamations, and it began with this: God, Domitian, demands. Or God, Domitian, commands. On all his proclamations. Do you know that everybody that came face to face with Domitian, they were to say, "My Lord and my God"? How would you address the President of the United States? How would I address the Prime Minister of Great Britain? Would I say, "My Lord and my God"? Far be it. There is only one Lord, and there is only one God, and the Lord and God is the one who gave the revelation to John. And yet this emperor decided that he wanted to be addressed as God. So his hatred was particularly pointed towards the Jew and the Christian. And so now we can understand why Domitian hates these two groups in society. Because these are the two groups who refuse to call him Lord and God. And rightly so. One of the things that Domitian introduced in Rome, that every year all males were to come and they would take a pinch of herbs, spices, whatever it was. They'd take a pinch and they'll go over to the fire altar and they would throw it down onto the altar. And in the meantime, they would shout, and they had to shout loud. I'm not going to shout loud, I did that last week, but they would have to shout loud, Kyrios Kaiser. Kyrios means anointed one. Kaiser means emperor. They were to shout, anointed emperor and God. Domitian. Now, do you think the Jew and the Jew and the Christian are going to take that pinch, that male is going to take a pinch of that, whatever it was, and throw it on the altar and shout that out? You know, I sometimes think that hindsight for us is, you know, we can look back and look at that, but and judge. But do you know, I would say that there were people who are New Testament Christians, like there would be today, who would do the same thing for expediency. I really believe that. When I look at the state of the church today, I firmly believe there's people in the church that would do that. They do the same thing if it was demanded of them today, to do exactly that.
It's all over our country.
Mm-hmm. And I refuse to do that. There is only one God and King.
It's happened before. Peter
This-
did that.
Mm-hmm.
This is nothing.
There's nothing new.
new.
No.
I mean, what's the deal? This is nothing new.
Right. Solomon said that. There's nothing new under the sun. All's been said and done.
Remember during the Columbine shooting up in Colorado, there was one little girl there that was claimed to believe in God.
Mhm.
And one of the shooters stuck a 20-gauge shotgun in her ear and said, "You believe in God?" He said, "Yes, I do." And he blew her brains out.
That's right.
You and I may have to do the same thing sometimes.
Mhm. We might have to.
We might
And
have to.
I firmly think we do every day. We are on trial every day for that, for our faith. But this business of what they were doing really was to say that Caesar, Domitian, was God, and that they were pledging allegiance to him and the state. But it was treason to refuse to do it. And if you refuse to do it, the victim would suffer torture, imprisonment, he was thrown into the fighting arenas, and last but not least, he would be tarred and feathered and crucified and lit up in order to have light for Domitian's wild parties, wild sexual parties. So it was under this scene that John had been banished, because banishment only came under Domitian's rule. And it was in this scene that John was banished to the Isle of Patmos under this Emperor Domitian. Getting back to those the provinces under the Roman authority. These people at the time of John's writing this letter, under Domitian, were so zealous and enthusiastic about emperor worship that they enforced it even more than Rome itself did. I kind of think in relation that someone like me has more passion and zeal for the American Constitution than most Americans do today. I'm an outsider. And I have more passion for your Lord and your foundations than most people that are in the insiders. And we have to understand what's going on in these provinces, especially Asia and Bithynia, that they wanted to enforce this more than Rome ever intended, or Domitian ever intended to enforce it. So hence, when we look at this book, this letter of Revelation, and who it was written to, and it was addressed to the 7 churches in the very hotbed of emperor worship. If you turn to Revelation chapter 22, verse 20, I know we've got a long way till we get that in the book, but I just want to show you something here. Revelation chapter 22, verse 20. You will notice that it will say, "Come, Lord Jesus, come." In other words, in the Greek writing, it says Kyrios Jesus, meaning Jesus is Lord, not Domitian is Lord. Jesus is Lord, and he is Lord indeed. That's what it's really saying. There is only one Lord. Revelation chapter 22, 20. It should be in there. I believe I've got the right scripture. Maybe I'll have to look it up if it's not. But it says right in there. Huh? 22:20, yeah. I thought I was right. 22:20. So what they're trying to say, well, at the very end of the book, John is re-emphasizing that the Roman emperor is not Lord over you. Jesus is your Lord, your master, your king. Your sovereignty is in him and not in Rome. This is all very important. I know you're thinking, oh, when are we going to get to the book? I'm giving you a thorough background of what's going on, so that when we get into the book, you have a background and an understanding of what's now going to take place. So I know I may have another week or two on the introduction, but it's all important for us to get through this. Maybe one day I'll turn it into a book, as my friends say. But I think it's very important for us to have the background of history at this time and an understanding of what's taking place. Because it will then, in my view, make the letter a lot more clearer for us in the future. I do appreciate you being in class today. I look forward to next week.